Now, Qatar says that it's suspended its mediation effort between Hamas and Israel until both sides show willingness and seriousness to end the war in Gaza. Well, joining us now is Noga Tarnopolsky, Israeli-Palestinian journalist based in Jerusalem. Noga, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Noga, how significant is this statement from Qatar? They have been sort of mediators working to find some sort of solution to the problem between Israel and Hamas. How significant is this statement?
It's pretty significant. It's maybe not determinative, but it is quite significant. Qatar has had two purposes. One, in fact, as you just said, to find a solution both for Israel to get its hostages back and for this war in Gaza to come to an end. Its other purpose has been to find a way out of the conundrum of having hosted Hamas in its territory, in its capital city for the last 15 years, having welcomed this terrorist group. So its way of getting out of that bind was presenting itself anew to the world as a mediator. And it has been quite successful at that. But if it's not working, as they said, then they want to get rid of Hamas before it becomes a burden on them, possibly with the arrival of a new President Trump in the United States.
Well, let's talk about that arrival of Donald Trump in the White House. How might that affect the war in Gaza? What happens to those hostages, of course? There's been some strong language from President-elect Donald Trump. What do you think is going to be the reality?
I think the reality is going to be unpredictable. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel is convinced that Trump is his best friend and will let him do whatever he wants. And in fact, just in the last few minutes, he issued a statement saying that he's spoken to Trump 3 times since his reelection, so that's in less than a week. And he says that they see completely eye to eye regarding the Iranian threat. So Netanyahu is trying to leave Israelis, certainly, with the impression that Trump will back him up no matter what. I have some doubts because Donald Trump has said contradictory things. He has made it clear that he expects Netanyahu to, quote, wrap up this war before he takes power. And his Arab American surrogates, who are by and large Lebanese American, even in the last few days say that Donald Trump could go so far as to impose a 2-state solution on Netanyahu. So everything is very confusing right now, and I expect it to continue to be that way for a little while.
What's the atmosphere on the ground, Noga? Every time we speak to you, you're able to tell us what's happening with the protests that have been ongoing since October the 7th. The families of the hostages who are out in the streets pretty much every week making the case for the end of hostilities and the return for the hostages. What's the general mood on the ground in Israel at the moment?
2 things are happening simultaneously. The protests are getting, I would say, I don't know what to say, more acute, more desperate. Last night, the protests were again very big all over the country, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, and from the north to the south. And you have a growing sense of rage, of desperation, of anger at the government. And this follows up, of course, on Tuesday's firing of the defense minister. So for most of these families of hostages, their number one contact in the government all along, and the only person in whom they felt any confidence, was the Minister of Defense. Netanyahu fired him the same night that Donald Trump was reelected. And from their point of view, that is seen as proof that Netanyahu has no intention to bring the hostages back and that he's not working to that end. So in that respect, things are feeling very, very on edge in Israel. And the protests now, I have to tell you, are basically daily protests, not of the same magnitude as the weekend ones, but a daily presence. On the other hand, what we're also seeing is Prime Minister Netanyahu enveloped in scandal, firing his defense minister mid-war, and making every effort to turn what was before the war his effort to make a kind of a legislative takeover of power in Israel. He's now doing it through administrative measures, through firing people, through putting in appointments who are cronies, and that is also intensifying the interior conflict within Israel.
Noga, I was wondering before we go, if you could give us your thoughts and especially what's the attitude in Israel of the events we saw in Amsterdam a few days ago, where the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters were attacked in the city of Amsterdam after attending a game versus Ajax. There are some conflicting reports and narratives based on timelines. Some people are saying that these attacks were unprovoked. Others were saying that the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters were chanting derogatory chants against the Arab community, burning Palestinian flags. What has seeped through where you are in Jerusalem? And also, can you tell us a little bit more about the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters?
Yeah, the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters are like many other football club supporters. The majority of them are very intensely loyal to the club. And then there are a few hundred ultras who are, kind of operate kind of like a gang. And we're talking about them. When we talk about the bad behaviors, the racist chants, I haven't heard of a flag burning, but I have seen videos of these ultras, the Maccabi Tel Aviv ultras, pulling down on at least two instances
Pulling down a
Palestinian
flag,
flags.
not burning. Yes, yeah, you're right.
Right. So these are, the ultras, and they are much like the ill-behaving ultras of many, many other teams. The issue is that in this case, something appears to have gone out of control, so that when all of the fans, and we're talking about between 2,000 and 3,000 Israelis, went to Amsterdam for this match, this Europa League match. And as they returned to town, to the center of Amsterdam from the stadium, there were gangs wearing black balaclavas, dressed entirely in black, waiting for them basically at every single tram stop, and then pursuing them sometimes on scooters, sometimes in taxis, sometimes on foot throughout the city and attacking them. Now, in Israel, this is being described, I believe, very unfortunately, as a pogrom. So it's important to emphasize no one has remained hospitalized, no one was killed. It is really far from a pogrom, despite the efforts by the Israeli government and most Israeli media to portray it as some sort of resurgence of ancient European anti-Semitism. That said, it was a very ugly episode in which some Israelis did get hurt, they were hospitalized, and there was a kind of chase all over Amsterdam in many locations against these Israeli fans. And Amsterdam police seems to have been, at best, nonchalant about it. What we're hearing from all of these Israeli fans is that the police were present, but they simply didn't react. And as we know now, apparently no one was arrested despite those really horrific videos that we've seen. So I think that remains an open question.
Noga, as ever, thank you so much for giving us your time. Always good to speak. Noga Tarnopolsky there, Israeli-Palestinian journalist based in Jerusalem.